Whenever you approach God that way, you have already lost the battle because you really need God to think about God. You need some help from the divine in order to really begin to formalize opinions of him, because in some way he has to bring revelation to us, or we will have no way of knowing him without him opening himself and showing us himself in some form. And so it helps us to understand that the brilliance of man, the brilliance of even brilliant thinkers, cannot appreciate the plan of God, because the Bible says, the fool says in his heart that there is no God. And sometimes we run into what we call educated fools. Sometimes academia have educated people to the place where they don't even believe in an existence of God, because they have suffered from naturalistic teachings of people like Friedrich Nietzsche and those who have a naturalistic viewpoint in believing that everything came into existence and there is really no metaphysical or ethereal effect on it at all, but that it's just there. And so then in history, then we find the church and the members of the church and the theologians of the church beginning to have to then formalize arguments for the existence of God as academia begin to kind of move away from God and move into the whole concept of Darwinism, where everything evolves from something else, and the replicator of life is something that just began and pushed to its limits all the way to the Big Bang Theory, where the world began some 15 billion years ago with a big pop. The question then would become, where did the big pop come from? If that's how it happened, what went bang? And so one of the theologians back in the day, his name was Elms, and theologian Elms, he was one that argued for the existence of God with what we call an ontological argument. Somebody say ontological argument. And an ontological argument just means that he's arguing God from the existence of the base of the nature of God's being. In other words, he says, and I quote, "Thou art a being than which nothing greater can be conceived," end quote. In other words, the ontological argument says if you look at your world, you at some point have to stop and pause at the metaphysical and say there has to be something transcendent outside of itself, because how then did it create itself? And whatever created it has to be a being, that nothing in our universe is greater than that being. That being has to be God. And then later in history, Aquinas comes along as a theologian, and he argues from what we call a cosmological argument. Somebody say cosmological argument. And the cosmological argument is arguing the fact that there is a cause of the universe and an effect of the universe. In other words, if something is moved, then something around it had to move it. Then if that thing is moving, something else had to move it. But this can't go on throughout infinity. Something had to be the first mover or the first cause. So if what we live in, this universe, is the effect of something, then what caused this effect to come into place? Even if you define the world beginning 15 billion years ago with a Big Bang, the question still remains, who caused the bang in the first place? Because that you can't get something out of nothing. The world could not just have created itself out of nothing. Something had to create it, because it has, by all major physicists and scientists, all believe that the world has a beginning point. They may argue when it began, but everybody seems to be in congruency that the world had to start at some place. Look at somebody and say, just stay with him, just stay with him. And so then, later we have in history a man by the name of William Paley, and William Paley has what we call the teleological argument, which is the argument for intellectual design in the universe. Basically, what he's saying is that you cannot have something that has systematic intelligence with it and then determine that it made itself, that nothing intelligent created it. It's something, and he's the one that first used the concept of the watch. If you have a watch, you cannot look at a watch and the intricacies of a watch and just say to yourself that over 1 billion years, all the particles just somehow